It's preparing.
Well, good morning to our second or third session, actually, on the cost of discipleship at Grace Episcopal Church. Today, we're going to look at chapters 2 through 5, but I forgot last week to ask about your favorite psalm. And the reason I asked about the favorite psalm, if you're ready, and you don't have to, if you don't have it, that's okay, is that Dietrich Bonhoeffer made it a very intentional thing that the Psalms would be prayed when he was at the leading the Finkenwald Seminary. He wanted very clearly to establish the linkage between the Old Testament and the New Testament, Jews and Christians. And the Psalms is clearly a way for us to really embrace the Jewish scriptures. And so that was one of the reasons he was really intentional about that, and why I asked if you had a favorite psalm. And I happen to know already what Penny's is, because we talked about that. It's one of my favorite psalms too, Psalm 139. And we've prayed that before, and that's a beautiful psalm because it involves a sort of a deep intimacy with God, and that God sort of knows us very intimately, better than we even know ourselves. And so that is a beautiful psalm to reflect on, and one that I've used with youth ministry. When I was a youth minister, very often I would start off with that psalm because it really, and it's since my youth, it's been one of my favorite psalms as well, because it really speaks to how God knows us from our birth, and helps us discern what we need to do with our life. So what about those of you, what other psalms have you come up with that are some of your favorites?
I needed to prepare. I can't find my book.
You can't find
it. Could I tell you what mine is?
Yes, Edna.
All the psalms are beautiful, but one the one that's familiar to everybody is Psalm 23.
Oh yes, of course.
There was a minister who preached on that one sermon, and it just stuck with me. And I had that recited by my niece at Jack's memorial service in Ireland. And this is why I chose it, because of this minister preaching on it. It says, Psalm 23 is full of secrets. First of all, the secret of a happy life. Every need is supplied. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That's the first one. Mm-hmm. The second secret is a happy death. And every fear is removed. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. And then the third secret is the secret of a happy eternity. Every desire is fulfilled when he says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That was very comforting to me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's why I chose that. I mean, even though there's many beautiful sermons or psalms.
It's funny, though. It's one that does not translate well. I mean, the King James Version is just beautiful. But there's one version that I was reading. It's the Lord is my shepherd. I have everything I need. That just is awful. It was like the New Hope Bible or something. It was one of the modern Bibles, and it was just like, oh, that's a horrible translation.
I shall not want.
I shall not. Yeah, it's beautiful in the King James Version. It's just beautiful. Yeah. It's my favorite.
So, I mean, I'd love to hear everybody else's choices so that I can read them, but it's very hard to pick. It's very hard to pick. So will everybody share and let me write down what their favorite one is?
Larry, do you have one? You're muted, Larry. You're muted. You're muted.
The first one was my favorite from kindergarten, and that's Psalm 117. And the reason it was mine and everybody else's was in kindergarten, we were obligated every morning to recite a psalm, and 117 is the shortest psalm in the Bible. So the teacher set a rule that said you could only do 117 once a month. Otherwise, she would have heard that every single day. But the other one that I like, because it spoke to me about things that I have trials and tribulations about, is Psalm 120. And it more or less talks about your distresses with dealing with the world, if you will, and how God helps you overcome those distresses. But that's a pretty succinct thing for kind of today's world.
Yes,
and the divisiveness that's going on.
Yeah. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war.
Mm-hmm. It's a good one.
Yeah.
Some of them, though, I was kind of reading through the Psalms, and because I was like, 23 is my favorite, but that's kind of like everybody's favorite. So I was reading through a lot, skimming through a lot of the Psalms, and some of them were like, some of them were or saying my enemies, and I'm going to smite you and all that stuff. And some of them I didn't really like. Some of them they were like, God, why are you punishing me and all that stuff. And I understand the reason behind it, but it's like, no.
What did you pick?
Me? Oh, same as you. 23. Always like 23.
23. That's
Mhm.
you.
And I'm
Great
always
minds think alike, Cindy. Great minds think alike.
And I'm always reminded the meme of the cat walking between the two rows of police dogs, and yay, do I walk through the valley.
There's a lot of smiting going on in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
The blood and guts Psalms, I can pretty much skip those.
Those ones are kind of like,
Yeah, a lot of people have criticized that the Old Testament is this very mean God, smiting people, having the heads of your enemies' babies dashed on the heads of rocks, and it caused some early Christian theologians to like Marcion to challenge whether or not it was the same God or not, and whether we should even accept Jewish scriptures into our canon of scriptures. Mm-hmm. But it is a kind of a dark picture of God, and I
always like to think that it's because he became a dad that he became softer.
He didn't become a dad. That was the Arian controversy. Remember?
Yeah. But you know what I mean. He softened because he became a parent.
But is David? Is he supposed to have written the Psalms, David?
Some of them
attributed to him, but no, they were probably more written in over years and by temple priests and that kind of thing. It was attributed to him as in terms of honor, but not directly at his hand. They say Psalm 23 maybe, but again, it's like Moses having written all 5 books of first 5 books of the Old Testament. That's the attribution by the Orthodox and traditional wing of these religions, but not in reality.
But the ones that are
maybe it's more like what the way the epistles go. They're from the school of Paul or what have you, or even Isaiah has been the school of Isaiah.
Right. There's actually 3 Isaiahs. So.
Yeah. But David was a poet, really, and most of the Psalms written by David, I think, are like poetry.
Well, maybe he was. We certainly know he was a soldier, and we certainly know he was a womanizer. So you can't get away from Bathsheba and David. So, well, listen, that was really nice. Let's get to Bonhoeffer then.
Well, let me just share. I could not find my book, and I had spent quite a bit of time, and I cleaned the house up, and this distresses me when I put things away and I can't find them. But I had gone through probably the first half of the Psalms, specifically looking for Psalms that had verses relative to nature. And I was looking for themes within the Psalms that would allow me to take a nature photograph. And I found quite a few, and I'm actually over the next year, that's going to be my project, is to address those and go out and look for things that I can photograph that would illustrate those verses that I picked out.
The great Leviathan.
No, well, I can go whale watching, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of things, and there's some that I already have. I said, oh, I know which photo I have in my collection that I put up for that one. So that's just going to be my intention for a little while.
But I would love to know what everybody else is. There's only 3 or 4 people.
Okay, Edna, mine is 147.
147.
And the reason for it is because it talks about the power of God and how he takes care of us all.
Very good. And everybody else? We haven't had.
Okay, I'll go.
We can also pick up next
8?
week. We don't have to do
We'll
it
do it
all.
next week. Okay, we'll do
Yeah,
it
let's
next
do
week.
it next week so we can
All right,
on with
okay.
Bonhoeffer. Okay, so
I
chapter.
have 5 favorites. I will narrow it down by next week.
They're all of them.
All righty then. Chapter 2, the call to discipleship, is probably the longest of the reading that this week, and it's a real pretty radical kind of message that he's trying to bring to us. He's because he's really saying that we as disciples are really being called out of a relative security into a life of absolute insecurity, and that is in truth into the absolute security and safety and fellowship of Jesus. So we move from out of this realm of the finite, our world, into this realm of infinite possibilities, is what he's proposing here, and so. Really, we are summoned into this, and he uses the word over and over again of obedience. That's sort of the theme word throughout this chapter. I want to just get your initial reactions to chapter 2. What you thought?
He totally lost me.
He totally
lost me. And it wasn't that I didn't understand what he was saying. I thought it was repugnant.
Okay. You thought it was repugnant?
Why repugnant?
It was, cult leader stuff.
Oh.
Okay. They say that, it ultimately begs the question of how do you tell if that's what you do? If you just kind of go, the guy comes in and he's charismatic and he's got mind control and whatever, and so he just gathers the zombies to join around him, the only and he's spinning this up because of a silence, not because of something that was said. So I don't see it as authoritative. I see it as kind of, I'm not sure what he was getting at, but if I understand, from what I understand, I don't agree. I don't agree.
I found it very challenging as well. I thought it was. I agree with you, Janice, that there's a sort of a bordering of a little bit of that obedience to a leader, irregardless of what your life's circumstances might be, and that is one of the things that cult leaders do sort of call you to, is this sort of like obey me, period, and then and then after you obey me, you'll have faith and you'll have understanding, and so in our modern world, we want to have a more of a what am I getting myself into situation.
There's no room for critical thinking.
Or we commit, and that we're so programmed to always say, hey, get to know what you're making a decision about. We do that even on vestry. We discuss, we debate back and forth before we make a decision to do something. We become informed, and that's sort of a model of the Western world and the whole world, right? Mm-hmm. But he's saying, through his examples of these 3 vignettes of these gospel accounts, that there is a certain amount of simple drop what you're doing, follow, and the rest of it will come to you later, right?
What year did he write this?
This was the year, I think he wrote it in the year that he was,
It was while he had the seminary.
yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
1934, 1935. That's when it
Yeah,
was
I
Okay,
think you're right.
so that was when Hitler was just starting to come into power and all that stuff. So because I was kind of weighing that against it, and I agree with you, Jan, that it kind of, there wasn't any room for critical thinking and questioning. And then I was thinking, well, he's writing this during when Germany was going through this dictatorship, but it was just before. So I wonder if he would have changed his tune a few years later.
Hitler was elected chancellor in 1933.
Yeah, but he didn't start really.
And he was, and Bonhoeffer was already in the resistance, already, looking at the Lutheran churches as caving in, as going over to the nationalistic side. I mean, he was already in the resistance. And, so he was kind of, writing the guidebook for blind fanatical Nazis to say, well, I don't need to know anything. I just, I'm just going to follow him. And that's going on. I'm not going to think about it, be critical in any way. And I don't know what he's taught. If that's what he's, I just don't know. I didn't like it.
Yeah, I had a very similar reaction to Jan's in that I looked at this and I said, oh my gosh, this sounds so German. I had a German grandmother. This is the way you do things. And it's like these apostles were called and they immediately obeyed. They weren't inspired. They weren't drawn to his teachings. They weren't characterized. And we know the Gospels are short and crisp, especially Mark, but I don't think that's what really happened. And I wouldn't interpret it that way. There has to be room for his I mean, I just thought back, well, what in my life, besides being called to my religion, what have I experienced? And I'm thinking about the time the first day I met Larry, and I looked into his eyes and I was called to be with him, to be part of what was going on. I just was attracted. And that's not obedience. That was something a whole lot deeper and complex and more difficult to explain. So I didn't like his explanation.
But wasn't Bonhoeffer really critical of the Catholic Church at that time? Because didn't the Pope sort of side with Hitler?
Yes.
Didn't they give in to Hitler's?
Kind of made a deal,
They made a deal. So I think in a way, Bonhoeffer was critical of the Catholic Church at that time, was he not?
Yeah. And the Lutheran as well.
The Lutheran Church was
He's scared of what was happening.
They were both lining up.
Yeah, and that's why I feel weird about it, because he can see what's going on in Germany, and yet then he's using words like obey and
He's using the same tactics to pull you the other way. It's like both sides of our political divide today. They take a fact and stretch it to whatever, both sides. And you can't come to anything. I think Larry had a whole different reaction.
Larry, go ahead.
I
want to say something too.
I thought it was, I actually thought it was straightforward in the sense that what he's really saying is that in order to be a true disciple, you must not allow worldly things to distract from your cross. That's it. The fact is that he leaves it unknown about what your cross will be is something that comes after the obedience, because it's only when you've given up those worldly things that you can become free through Jesus to discover your cross. And if you don't do that, you don't discover your cross except by randomness,
right?
Which is a human thing and not a godly thing.
Right. Absolutely agree with you, Larry. And so I'm reflecting now on my own journey, my own life experience. Okay. So when I was, and you know the story already because I've shared it with you all. When I was 15 or 16, I was at Montecito at the Jesuit retreat house. I had this Eucharistic vision, lots of light, and then a couple of days later, I heard the calling, woke up and heard the calling, become a priest. It scared the hell out of me for obvious worldly reasons. But it called me into a moment of calling, which called me into a moment of obedience. And so for several years, I obediently journeyed towards becoming a priest, either through the Franciscans or later on, through the Jesuits. And I didn't know what I was going to get myself into. I didn't know what was going to be required of me later, what suffering would be required. And I have suffered on behalf of Christ and on behalf of being obedient. So I do believe that when one is called by God, and this is God calling, he's not trying to say that there's some other person calling. This is God who he's saying is calling you through Jesus. When God is calling you, you either obey or you go your own way. And so
You
now,
didn't, though, not right away, Father. And
but yes, no,
that's
listen,
more
for
real.
20 years, I thought to myself, okay, wait a minute. I'm not suited for this. I'm not qualified for this.
You struggled with it.
I struggled with it, right. But I eventually said, you know what? I have to obey the calling, which is still there. And it'll work out the way it works out. And here I am, 24 years as a priest. And before that, I had served in many lay ministry roles as well. So I get the whole idea of the initial obedience to the call. I do get that part. So just want to say that.
It
The other-
could be.
I saw something more sinister than that. I saw something more, taking the first vignette that Bonhoeffer used of the young man who came and said, I want to be your disciple. And Jesus said that,
Right.
The foxes have holes and the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And he was, do you really know what you're taking on? You have to, there could be suffering. There could be, that's basically a warning that this might not be easy. Okay. This might not be a bed of roses. But then the young man says, well, let me go bury my father. And Jesus says, you can't delay that long, and I didn't see that as, here's the deceased in a shroud waiting to be dragged into the grave, and the son is not going to be there, but that I have to let my father pass away. I have to fulfill that duty before I then come after you. And what Jesus said at that point is, you can't wait. You can't wait. Let the dead bear their dead. So that's how, and I understand that. That's the obedience to the consequences. Once you know that it's the right thing to do, once you know that this is the Messiah, this is someone to follow. And what Bonhoeffer appeared to be saying is that none of these people, none of the disciples who were called, knew who Jesus was. They had no idea. This dude shows up, interrupts their day and says, come with me. And they do. And they know nothing. They have no idea who he is, what he stands for, what his teachings are. But they went, then that's what we should do as well. And that's the disturbing part. Not that, people had to, maybe you won't know how this is going to affect you. Maybe you won't know what the burdens will be. Maybe you don't know what the suffering might be, or the dislocation that you might experience, the disdain from your own family that you might encounter. But at least you're doing the right thing. Because this, what he's proposing here would be just as valid for Hitler, Jesus, or Charles Manson. Okay.
Penny.
I didn't get to, I hear what you're saying. I didn't get too hung up on that, but I underlined on page 75, here is the sum of the commandments, to live in fellowship with Christ. And to me, that's what Bonhoeffer is saying, that it not necessarily it's immediate, but it is a way of life to follow his commandments. And I know that this goes past the chapter we're in, but another part that touched me is at the bottom of page 90. Thus, the call to follow Christ always means a call to share the work of forgiving men their sins. Forgiveness is the Christ-like suffering, which is the Christian's duty to bear. And again, that makes it applicable to my life. You know, I'm not going to be a rich person who gives everything away. I'm going to bury my mother before I do something else. But these are the pieces of the chapters that made sense for me in a very, very simplified but easier way. I didn't get hung up. The obedience is, to me, is the obedience to the word and to the commandments. And that is what we are supposed to be doing.
I think you're right, and that we are continually being called into
Right.
obedience. It is not a one-time alone matter. It is if the call is issued, if it's rejected, the call might be issued again. You know, I mean, like I said, I waited. I got scared last minute, joined the Navy at 18, hoping that this obedience and fear would just go away. Like if I give it time, it'll just pass like a fever. You know, it didn't. And it wasn't until 35 that I said, okay, I'll do it. You know, and that's when I presented myself to the Episcopal Church. So I get this. This is a continual needing to die. He says there, you know, that when Christ calls a man, he calls him to die. You know, yes, Larry.
So I wanted to share with you essentially what I think was a dramatic moment for me for calling. Years ago when we were in Sudbury, we had just moved there, and neither one of us had been in church for 25 years. And Sue went down to a local church. It happened to be an Episcopal church. And one thing led to another. And she came home one day and said that she was going to go on a mission trip with the youth group to work on houses in Appalachia. And it hit me right between the eyes. And God basically said through me, you can't go without me. And it wasn't because I was afraid for her to be alone. The fact was that what I felt in my heart instantly was that was going to be a life-changing thing, and it would get in between what we were as a couple. And I said, you can't go without me. That's what I meant. And I didn't know what the Word of God was. I had no idea what the youth group was. I had no idea where Appalachia was. I had no idea of anything except that I must go. And that was a calling, and it changed my life forever.
Love had entered into it, right? It was
sorry?
love that entered into that.
It had nothing to do with love. It had to do with, well, I mean, love in the context of our relationship, but mostly it was in the context of figuring out that she would become a different person, and I would be out of the loop in a way.
You know, a love of God too.
Well, at that time, I didn't know that I loved God. So I'm saying that was an obedience because there was nothing that I knew about what was to happen. I didn't do a trade-off of financials or anything else. And that's kind of like a little vignette of what Bonhoeffer's trying to say.
It was divine intervention.
And if I could just put this in context, remember, Bonhoeffer is looking at the landscape of Christianity in his time. And it was like a Christendom where everybody's Christians, everybody just goes to church and does the sermon. There's nothing that's being required of people. There's nothing costly. And so within that context, he's looking at the scene and how everybody's just flocking to follow this person, Hitler. And he's trying to put this back in the context of the real spiritual journey is one of obedience to God, not obedience to Hitler, not obedience to the outward forms of living one's Christian faith by just simply, getting your ticket punched. And I was in church this Sunday, I heard the sermon, boom, I get in the car and drive off as quickly as possible.
He referred to it as it was nothing but a pillar of bourgeois respectability. Correct. And it was not transformative at all.
Exactly. And I think that's what he's saying. He's getting at the very core of what it is to be a disciple, I think. So, all right, let's move on to chapter 3. Single-minded obedience, more of the same.
I think one of the reasons, though, I had struggled with it is just, for me, and probably a lot of women, the word obey is just, it's just been used against us so much. And so, I hear the word obey and my mind just goes, no, so I think I have a bit of a prejudice against that,
Oh, and you also served, over 20 years as a Navy enlisted person.
Yeah.
And I remember when I got, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, you have to obey orders, but there's always that little caveat in there within, there's
right.
that in the military, there's that little thing that says, you have to obey orders. However, yeah. And then also too, as you get higher up, it's like, yeah, I got to obey orders, but I'm a chief. So I have the ability to speak up.
Yeah, exactly.
Give orders.
Well, when I got out of the Navy after my first 4-year enlistment, I had gotten a job at a laboratory over in LA, and within 2 weeks they had come over to the laboratory to where I was working in the chemistry department, and they wanted to put me in the microbiology department, which meant I'd be working with bodily fluids, if you get what I mean.
Yep.
And I said to them, no, I'm not doing that, because I had enough of obedience that I wanted to exert my independence and say no, because I had no ability to say no for those 4 years. And I quit on the job. I handed in my lab coat and my ID card and walked out of the building.
Yeah, that was the nice thing, is you do have the ability to quit. And but I always have to laugh because people, in my 20 years, I never had anybody say, I order you to. It's just, they tell you to do something, you do it. It's the same thing in the civilian where your boss tells you, but you do have that ability to say, I quit.
Right.
Well, I had a military experience in that my father returned from World War II when I was about 4.5, and having been raised to the rank of an officer, was used to ultimate obedience from everyone. And do you think a 4-year-old little girl that had been spoiled living with her grandmother was very obedient?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of discipline.
And to tell you the truth, being, I was a BOSA mate. I can tell you, people respect us, including the officers, to the point where we were supposed to get underway and we were having problems with the anchor chain. And the captain actually came up to my master chief and said, are we leaving tomorrow? And master chief said, no, sir, we got to get this fixed. And the captain went, okay.
So you observed some compromise, at least, going on in actual operation,
and a lot to do with who you are, what rate you are. BOSA mates have a lot of power in the Navy. So anyway, but I digress.
But the issue is that the word obedience for many of us is loaded in one way or another.
Yeah, obedience is a funny word.
And calling is it more in the light of what Larry experienced and that I shared in, is a whole. It's called to. It's more like Richard Rohr when he talks about non-dualistic thinking. It's not do this or else. It's let's open the world to possibilities and let God answer. It's that kind of obedience. It's non-dualistic openness to what's being brought to us. He ties this to contemplation too, so it's brought to us in complete silence, but it's at least letting God's voice to us come by putting other things aside. And that's that. I wouldn't use the obedience to describe that. So I think we maybe are hung up on that.
My old priest, he was in the Army for 40 years. He was an officer, intelligence officer. And then he got out and he decided to become a priest. And he said he had to. His calling was like this elephant in the room for years, that he just could not ignore this elephant until he finally, became a priest. And he said it was just such in his face every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Even when he was in the military. Mm-hmm.
Anyways, what were reactions? Any thoughts on chapter 3? Your
I
initial
didn't know we were supposed to read that far, so I didn't.
You only read chapter 2?
I have some things I didn't
We
do.
didn't really decide what the assignment was, so you signed off yesterday or last week. And then we all said, oh, I guess we're going to chapter 2. So
I started 3, but I didn't get far.
Okay.
I didn't
Anybody go through 2 all the way to 5?
No.
I did.
I used to 2,
Okay.
part of
oh,
3.
Larry did, but he just stepped away for a minute. He said he's
All right.
regretted.
So we can always
Did
pick
you
up
have
next week with, we can go to chapters 3 through 5 next week
Okay.
Yeah.
and just end today at chapter 2. We'll just go an extra week. It's no big deal. It's
Okay.
just us anyways. But yeah, this week was supposed to be chapters 2 through 5.
Oh,
And
Do
next
we
week
have
will
a
be
list or something that we're supposed to be attending to? Because I don't think we've ever really gotten like an agenda for this, you know, like
well,
when we were
I
going to
just announced,
discuss this.
I announced last week what it is it's chapters 2 through 5. I mean, if
didn't
you want to
see
write
that.
it down, I can tell you what our game plan is. I can tell
Yeah,
you
that would be helpful.
Okay, it's 2 through 5 was week 3.
Okay.
Week 4 is chapter 6 through 13. The chapters are shorter as we go along.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Week 5 is chapters 14 through 20. Week 6 is chapters 21 through 29. And that's it.
Okay.
Oh, wait, excuse me. And week 7 is 30 through 32. 30 to 32. So that's
So we're just pushing all that out a little bit now.
Mhm.
yeah, we're just going to push it out a little bit. We're going to push it out an extra week. So next week we'll do 3 through 5.
Okay.
Okay. And we'll just end it here since it's at 11:40 anyways.
Well, you know, I would be interested before we end it. Oh, Larry wants to talk. Go ahead.
In going through that, it seems to me that that there wasn't much distinction in my mind between 2 and 3, but I thought there was a lot more distinction in chapter 5. So we might concentrate more on or skim through, but get more into the latter part of chapter 4 and 5.
Okay.
I mean, that was just a my mindset was that there was some more clarity about what each of us as individuals might be bearing as our own cross.
Yeah, I agree. It's chapter 3 is very similar to chapter 2.
Yeah.
Where what he's trying to, kind of explore there is sort of the mindset of obedience and what that it's a kind of a single-minded kind of thing. So
Okay.
Before we go, and because we still have time this morning, I am interested because I've known all of you through Bible study and what was your calling? Father Munoz shared his and Larry shared his, but what others of you, what brought you to the Episcopal faith, and
what were your
brought you
moments
to
of
Grace?
obedience?
Yeah, and also what brought you to Grace Church?
Yeah, let's talk about that. That's great. Great question.
I'll go.
Janice.
I was raised in this Hinckley fundamentalist church in West Texas, okay? And they were the sweetest people in the world, and it was very much a community. And to this day, my notion of what a Christian community behaves like is those people, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But the doctrine wouldn't survive a decent high school education. And I'm telling you, it was an article of faith that the music be bad, okay? So I was on a starvation diet, I'm telling you. And, honest to God, there was one hymn we had that we sang all the time that was to the Looney Tunes theme.
Oh my God. Oh,
and nobody seemed to notice. Nobody seemed. So I was glad when I went off to college and I could walk away. I didn't believe it anymore. I didn't want to stick with it, so I went off to college, and I was hired as a paid singer at All Saints Episcopal Church in Austin when I was 18. And I couldn't believe the music. I mean, they had to, and this was a morning prayer church, okay? No communion. We sang canticles. And they had to carry me out on a stretcher after that first service. It was so beautiful. And I was hooked from that point on.
Thankfully, Martha was never exposed to that.
She wasn't, but my kids were raised in the Episcopal Church. They are cradle Episcopalians, okay?
Yeah.
So, you know, they didn't have the experience I had, but
No, but you've shared it, no doubt.
so I had gone from Episcopal church to Episcopal churches, you know, we moved to Fort Worth. I drove by this little Episcopal church on, you know, on my way to work, and oh, look at that pretty little place. Well, you know, I'll just kind of, you know, I got to show it to you, okay?
Is this in Texas?
Yes. Now, this is Christ the King Episcopal Church.
Oh, that's pretty.
It looks like us.
Yeah, you think?
Looks like
I mean,
us.
It
Shades of
does.
gray.
It's like Grace turned around,
Shades
side,
of
you know, flipped.
It was also a kit church. It was like they got it from
Ours probably was
Montgomery
too.
Ward's or
Well,
you know, Sears
yeah.
or something. And they
There's
rescued
rumors
it
that
from
ours is there's rumors that ours is a kit church too, but I haven't gotten proof
You're
yet.
not entirely sure. Well, this truly was. It was a Methodist church out in the country for a while that
So was
the
I.
congregation drifted away, and it was being used as a hay barn. And we bought that building and moved it onto this lot and spiffed it up to become, you know, Christ the King Episcopal Church. And you know, so when I pulled around the corner to visit the church that Martha had picked out, I almost laughed out loud. I mean, here, look at this place. I came because of Martha, of course. But if the music had not, I'll have to tell you, the music was pretty bad when I first came, and I was just coming visiting. And I would have just kind of gone to a different, I was driving past two little Episcopal churches to get to Grace, you know, when I lived in Escondido. And if the music hadn't gotten a lot better, I would have just kind of been at Trinity, you know, in Escondido. But at some point, the choir director left. They'd lost their accompanist. They asked Martha to step in, and then they asked her to do it for permanent, for, you know, for a salary. And by that time, the music was fine. It was really good. So that's my. It is that mundane. I mean, it is that uninspiring. That's how I ended up.
How lucky were we to get
Very
you?
lucky for me. Yeah.
Mine's a little weird. I was baptized in the Anglican Church of Canada, and but when I was a baby, when I was before the age of 10, I was in Florida with my mother, and she didn't really go to church, even though she was the Anglican. I don't think she knew about the Episcopal Church, to tell you the truth. And but then when I went back up to Canada to live with my dad, I went to the Baptist church because my stepmother was Baptist, and the whole family went. And Dad was out on the ship, so he didn't really have a say. And so then when I moved back to the States, I was back down in Florida, and I, you know, was looking for a church, and oh, look, there's a Baptist church. Oh God, no. It's a big difference between Canadian Baptist churches and American Baptist churches. And in theology, everything, you know. And so I didn't go to church at all. The next time I went to church was boot camp, and I went to the Catholic service because that was the fun one. Everybody went to the Catholic service. And then got out, married a Catholic who was lapsed, because he was the same way as me, got, you know, was in the military and stuff like that. And but also too, he was he was kind of pushing against the whole Catholic doctrine and all that stuff. And so anyway, I was at work one day, and I mentioned to my boss, this is in Connecticut, and I mentioned to my boss that, you know, I would like to go back to church, but I don't know where to go. And I happened to mention that I had been baptized Anglican, and I had gone to the Anglican church off and on, you know, when I went to visit my grandparents. So it wasn't foreign to me. And he said, well, have you gone to the Episcopal church? I'm like, what is that? And he said, well, that's the Anglican church in the United States. And so there happened to be Anglican church or Episcopal church at the bottom of our street. So my husband and I went, and we just were immediately welcomed, and we were baking apple pies the next week. He felt comfortable, I felt comfortable, it was great. Then we moved to Virginia, and there was an Episcopal church down the street, and we started going to that, and we got involved in the vestry and all that stuff. And
Was Brian McGurk there by chance?
what's that?
What was the name of your priest at that time in Virginia?
Oh, this is in Newport News, Virginia. It was
Oh, he was in Richmond.
yeah, no, this is Newport News. And
Okay,
anyway, but up until that point, oh, when I was going to church and when I decided to go back to church, it was because I had gone back to Canada, and my uncle is a minister in the United Church of Canada, which is like a conglomerate of Baptists and Methodists and this, that, and the other. It's a strictly Canadian thing. And he said to me, "Are you going to church?" And I went, "No, I'm not." Guilted me, absolutely guilted me. So that's how I ended up back in church. But I also felt like something was missing anyway. And so then I moved out here after a divorce. And I didn't go to church for a long time. Again, my uncle guilted me. I actually did not have a good, I went to Trinity first, thought it was okay. A little large for me, went to the coffee hour and nobody spoke to me. And I thought that was so weird because in Virginia, that would never happen. And Connecticut and all the other Episcopal churches. Then I went to Grace and the exact same thing happened to me. And I stood in the corner where the little altar is for the children with my cup of coffee and nobody said a word to me. And so I didn't go to church for a long time after that. And then again, my uncle, every time I went home. And so then I went back to Grace and I was totally welcomed. And somebody heard me sing alto and next thing you know, I'm in the choir. But that was, so I kind of came and went. And that was 10 years ago. And but I did not have a good experience at Grace the first time. That was, 15 years ago. So it was just kind of funny. I just thought maybe it's a California thing. Because in Virginia, oh my God, if somebody new walked into the church, oh Lord, it was the Southern
They'd be
hospitality.
mobbed. They'd
Yeah,
be
mobbed.
yeah.
Mobbed. We even had a homeless lady come in, and she came in after the procession, slinked into the back and sat there, and it was obvious that she was homeless. And she tried to leave before the procession was going out, and people literally, no, you got to come in for coffee, And next thing you know, she was in for coffee. They were giving her food, and all that stuff. And she became a member of our church, and she wasn't homeless anymore. But it was just like, and it was really, and she kind of, she was really homeless, and they just mobbed her. But that's, Southern hospitality too.
Church. My son Jason is married to an Austrian girl, and she was from Vienna, basically, but her parents lived in Germany. And she goes on, she's a college professor, and she goes on sabbaticals every so often, and they're like 6 months or a year. And they always go to Europe for those sabbaticals so she can see her family and that kind of stuff. And they tried to go to a Lutheran church there, and they speak German. The kids speak German. Jason does okay. She, of course, does. And they go into this service. There's no heat in the sanctuary, and so everybody's there bundled up in their coats, and nobody spoke to them.
Yeah,
nobody. That would never happen in an American. A family comes in.
My God.
They can speak German and they can sing. They would be chained to the door before they'd let them out of there. So
yeah,
they just didn't go to church while they were on sabbatical.
I think the first time I came to Grace, that was kind of when stuff was going on, and maybe that's why I wasn't. Because the second time I came to Grace, it was a whole different ballgame. I was mobbed, and that might have been when Grace was going through that little transition.
Yeah.
I went to St. Bartholomew's in Poway when we first came out to San Diego for 6 months, and no one spoke to us.
Yeah.
And on Sundays, some Sundays I'd go in collar, some in civilian clothes, and only the clergy spoke to us.
Yeah, it's weird.
And then I went to St. Peter's Del Mar, and we were mobbed literally the same way. So we decided
it might be a Californian thing. I don't know.
No,
I think it's a parish to parish thing. There's a sort of a culture, a chemistry that develops in a parish. Yeah. And I hope I don't think we'll ever get there at Grace.
No. Did you ever hear the joke about the old bishop in Grace? He came to Grace, and he brought his deacon with him. And when it came time for the peace, somebody overheard him say, "This is going to take a while." Poor Gwen, she really tried to break us of the whole huggy thing.
The clergy hates this communal piece where everybody has to greet everybody. Did I get you? I didn't mean to skip you. You know, the clergy hate it. They hate
I
it.
know.
And that's the worst
and-
thing since COVID is to lose that. It
Yeah.
really is.
Grace is really bad about the huggy piece.
Well, the
Yeah,
singers
no.
love it when the choir sits down.
Yeah,
Okay?
it's a small enough church though, we can kind of get away with it.
We
But
can
it
get
was just
away with it.
hilarious when they overheard Bishop Mathis say that to his deacon.
Oh, our church that both of us got drawn into was probably 3-4 times the size of Grace. It wasn't huge, but it was bigger. But it was the same way. It was the Grace took like 15 minutes, or the piece took like 15 minutes. So
I love it, Grace,
Yeah.
that the children are passed around.
I think it's
love
great.
that.
It's great.
Love that. I really think that Grace really takes to heart the whole, when a child is baptized and the parishioners say that it is their job to look over that child, I think Grace takes that very seriously.
Yeah, remember
Because-
that's our mission statement. That's important.
Yeah, and it's because even afterwards, coffee hour, there's no parents that really have to worry about where their kid is, because somebody is looking out for this child. It's just wonderful, and I've not seen that other churches.
Let's hear. We only have a few minutes left. Let's hear from some others, either Edna or Penny.
Well, I'm a Grace because of Edna.
Oh. Well, I was told to take care of you, Penny.
No, I live next door, and Edna invited me. But my path has been long, shall we say. Raised for 50 years as a Catholic, married and divorced, and the Catholics really don't like divorced people. And then married a retired Lutheran pastor. And my introduction to both the Lutheran Church and the Episcopal Church was such a sense of community. And, I maintain as a Catholic, at least for me, and I moved around a lot, go into church and the relationship is with God, it's with Christ. And unless you really reach out to a women's group or something like that, there isn't coffee hour, there isn't the sense of community that I have experienced in both Lutheran and Episcopal churches. So when Joe and I moved to Vermont, he had been to a Benedictine priory in Vermont, and essentially he always has maintained that saved his life when he went there for a retreat. So we went to Vermont and connected with them for during the week kind of services, but weekends he wanted the sense of community of a parish church. And so again, we mostly connected with Episcopal. He had a long history of being a pastor, and he thought there were ways that things should be run. So he was on the vestry, and it wasn't all, let's just say he was a provocateur, and he always took he liked that to be that role. So it was at times kind of rough in our community life. But when Edna said, come see what we have at Grace, I said, okay. And I'm very impressed with Father Frank, with his background, with his journey, and find it a warm, challenging experience.
All around, Penny, right?
Pardon me?
It was a good deal all around.
All around.
Getting to know you.
Thank
Have you a good friend and a neighbor.
Thank you.
And Edna, you've been going to Grace for a long time.
I have, and I resented Anne saying, "Oh, Edna, you deserted us." But I was in Ireland during the split. We came back for 3 months in Ireland, and I really enjoyed Father Eric. He was a wonderful speaker, and I loved his sermons. And I felt very much at home in Grace. coming from Ireland, Church of Ireland, which is the Anglican Church, really, and then living in Canada for 5.5 years, I was a member of the Anglican Church there. And when I was moving to Canada, the archdeacon said to me, Edna, when you go to California, you know, there won't be an Anglican church. And there'll be a lot of strange churches there. Make sure you latch on to the Episcopal Church, which is closest to the Anglican Church. So there happened to be a lovely little Episcopal church in Rialto where I lived, and that's where I went. And I was very involved in the church there. So yeah, and then I came home to Grace, and I'm happy to be there.
Well, folks, that was nice session. Let's all see you. I'll see some of you on Vestry, and I'll see you at Bible study Wednesday at 10 o'clock, our Lectio Divina, and we'll be looking at the reading for the first Sunday in Lent.
And Father, could you please explain again the whole meaning of the
process?
Yes, because